Well, thank you. Thank you very much for spending an hour with me today. You know, usually a lot of these talks, they happen, and at the end of it, you go meet your friends and they say, hey, what did you hear? And then you start scratching your head, right? And you can't remember anything. So I want to make this productive so that each one of you at least have one or two takeaways in your own ways. So I'm going to make it as interactive as possible. So I'm not really going to give you a long speech, but maybe just talk for a couple of minutes so that it gives you time to think about the questions, you know, because I understand that all of you are young, aspiring people who want to do something in your lives. And so I'm sure you've already started thinking about it or doing things. And you know, I think knowledge always expands when you hit a crossroad. You know, you come to a decision and then you say, oh, do I do A, do I do B? And so everybody has those questions. And so in your own mind, whatever you're thinking, make that the basis for your question. So that is something that you can take away with you. And I may or may not have the answer, but I may at least give you a way to think about it. And ultimately, the answer has to come from you. Because entrepreneurship never works if you do it because somebody else asks you to do. In fact, you know, a lot of times, a lot of the young people come to me and say, I have a fantastic idea. And at the end, they say, oh, do you think I should do it? I say, no, you shouldn't. Because if you're looking for endorsement from somebody else, it never works, right? Because it has to come from within you. Because what I've found is that it doesn't matter what it is in life, if ever you're trying to do something bigger than what you're capable of doing right now or what you think you're capable of doing right now, there's only 3 surprises. One is it's a lot harder than what you think, it takes a lot longer than what you think, and it's going to need more money than what you think. So unfortunately, there's only bad news. And so the first time you hit a bad news, it's difficult. You know, should you keep going? Should you stop? And all your well-wishers, your mothers, fathers, parents, friends, everybody else, if you tell them that you're going to be an entrepreneur, what do you think their advice will be? No, right? Not because they don't mean well for you, but they just don't want to see you hurt, right? They say, when you have a safe path, why would you want to take the circuitous path and get into trouble, right? And so first time when you hit that hurdle and you come across that big problem, everybody will be on your case and they'll say, I told you so. I told you not to do this, right? And so against all that pressure, if you have to keep going, that strength has to come from within you. It cannot come from somebody else. So never become an entrepreneur or embark on an entrepreneurial journey if you're not really there. And if you're really there, then rest is easy. Because, you know, I think the way our entrepreneurial journey started, I mean, I didn't know anything about entrepreneurship when I was in IIT Madras. I knew about being a student, and then I went to Canada, and then I got my master's. Then I taught for a year. Then I knew about teaching, so I thought I would become a professor, so got a PhD. But then another accident happened. It just so happened that there was a little startup in Toronto, which Motorola had bought, and the VP of engineering of that little struggling startup had left his job and come to teach at Queen's University. We have another graduate here from Queen's University, who had come to teach there and had gotten to know Peter Brackett. And so when Motorola bought that company in Toronto, they asked him to go back and be the head of engineering again. And within 3 months after he left, I got my PhD. So Peter called me up and said, hey, you know, forget about all this professorship. Why don't you come here? And I knew Peter so well that I said, it makes sense. So I went there. And over the next 4 years, it turned out to be a fantastic opportunity. You know, we built a $100 million business, 400 people. And so there were 3 of us who made it all happen. So it's not like I knew anything about business or building products or anything like that. But that opportunity gave me an opportunity to do that. And then in 1984, this is a long time ago, when I and Jayshree looked at it, we said, hey, if we can do this for Motorola, maybe we should do it for ourselves. But then there was no venture capital in Canada at that time. The only two places which had this new concept called venture capital was Boston and Silicon Valley. So we moved to Boston, and that's how our entrepreneurial journey started. And when we actually took that plunge, finally, it took about 3 years to get the green card and all the legal status, everything else. But as soon as I got the legal status, I left and started the company. But the way we thought about this is, Jayshree also went to IIT Madras. So we both had, probably some of the best degrees, and both of us were educated. So we said, we will never starve. We will never be in trouble where we won't have 2-3 meals a day and a shelter on our roof. So where is the risk, right? So there's no risk. So might as well make sure that we spend our lives. So our thinking was, we want to make sure that we spend our lives doing things that we really enjoy doing, right? Because there's really no risk. What's the risk? What's the big risk? As long as you don't steal or do some criminal stuff or have to go to jail or anything like that, right? You don't want to do those things. But if you are not doing those things, then we said, what's the big risk? We can always go get a job and always make a living. So that's how our journey started. So maybe, why don't we talk a little bit about your journeys and the questions that you have in your minds.
Okay, so thank you for you being here, but it's a very honor to listen to your journey. I don't know much, but I think I have known that, yes, you started a company called Sycamore Network, and in few years it was actually a listed company. And happy to hear more about your stories and a little bit about myself. I came to IIT and started working with Professor Ashok here, where a problem statement was given to me how to make commercial building more greener and healthier. And it's been 7 years that we have started a company called ZB here, where we do a lot of innovations to make commercial buildings more energy efficient. And given the drive of carbon neutrality and all, we have a long way to go. So as an entrepreneur, of course, we struggle a lot in every aspects of the business. Sometimes product failures, customers not happy, finance, everything. Keep learning and keep evolving. And of course, we keep hearing and listening to people like you, where we get motivated, yes, that don't look back. There will be days where things will fall in place automatically.
Yeah, so, I think what happens is that every day you have new problems, right? And the journey is always one step at a time. The vision has to be clear. Where you want to get to is very clear. How you get there is not clear. When you become successful, you tell a story in a way as though you just went from point A to point B. But the journey isn't like that, right? It's like, goes all over the place. And the question is, do you have a clarity in your own mind as to separate things that you control versus things that you don't control? You have to be very clear about that, right? Things that you control are the things that you can work hard on and do something about. And that results in action items, and you're going to actually work on those and get them knocked out. If things that are beyond your control overwhelm the problem, then you have to pivot, right? And that pivoting sometimes creates a little bit of hardship. It would be like a failure, right, in some ways, because you started off with something, that thing didn't work out, and then you have to take a turn. And most of the times, you can take small turns, and you do course corrections, and you get there. But sometimes, you have to take a sharp turn. It's almost like you have to shut down the whole thing, and then you start again with something else. But long time ago, when I was starting my entrepreneurship career, in all of Boston, which is like the mecca of startups, like Silicon Valley, there were maybe 5 or 6 entrepreneurs, right? So entrepreneurship wasn't a mainstream. So if you failed, you paid a big penalty. And because those days, the venture guys did not fund you until they were absolutely sure that if you failed, it hurt you a lot more than it hurt them, personally, right? So I and Jayashree, I had to go without a salary for at least 1 year, unemployed. And then they wanted to make sure that the commitment was absolutely firm and everything else. And so those days, it wasn't quite clear as to what happens if an entrepreneur fails, how do you bounce back, right? But these days, entrepreneurship is a career. And so as long as you have to take that turn, not because of the things that you did not do, you didn't work hard or anything like that, you had to take that turn because the market changed, because the technology changed, because of whatever changed. The other people for your next venture are more likely to fund you because now you're more experienced, you've shown your tenacity and everything else. So look at entrepreneurship as a career. One way to look at that is that the world is changing, right? And it's changing faster and faster and faster. I mean, older guys like me can see the change, a rapid change, right? But even you, when you look back just 10 years ago, just look back 10 years ago and compare where the world is today compared to 10 years ago, it's dramatically different. So in 10 years from now, it's going to be even more different, right? And every change is led by somebody. And so who is leading that change? That's an opportunity, right? So everybody in this world will have only two opportunities, two possibilities. Either you grudgingly accept the change or you willingly lead the change. And what we want to see in the world is people with good values, good ethics, well-meaning for the world, people who are compassionate, lead those changes so that they're all leading those changes in a way so that the world becomes a better place, right? And so the opportunity to lead those changes isn't a one-time thing. It's going to happen again and again and again and again over the next several decades over your career. So entrepreneurship is a career choice. It's not like a one-time gambling deal. Once upon a time, it used to be like that. You took a gamble, and if it didn't work, you paid a huge penalty. In fact, in India, it used to be terrible because if you failed, it was very hard to regroup and come back again because it was a stigma, right? Not anymore. I think so. I think entrepreneurship is a career choice. And what will happen slowly is that if you're not the entrepreneur who's actually starting the very first thing, either a founder or a co-founder, doesn't matter. Everybody who works for these fast-changing companies has to be entrepreneurial. So if you're not entrepreneurial, you're not going to survive in your career, right? And so, but if you're entrepreneurial, then everything is exciting. Every change excites you as opposed to sort of feel like, hey, why is the world changing, right? And so you'll have a lot more fulfilling career, a fulfilling life. You can tell people who are entrepreneurial because when you talk to them, when you say, how are things going? You see a certain excitement in their voice because they're reinventing themselves. They're doing things that are exciting, that excite them more than anybody else. It doesn't matter whether it's impressive for other people or not, but they themselves are pretty excited about it. And that excitement, I think if you are blessed to be waking up in the morning and you're excited about what you do that particular day, that's the best day you can have in your life. And if you can live every day of your life like that, there's nothing more than that, right? That's the biggest blessing, biggest gift you can give yourself or give anybody else. And so being an entrepreneur is a career choice, is a lifestyle choice that you make. And usually, people who are entrepreneurial and entrepreneurs, usually I've found, have two characteristics. One is they tend to be very optimistic, right? More optimistic than what the reality calls for, actually. Because it doesn't matter how hard the problem is or how difficult a day is, they always feel like tomorrow is going to be better than today. And it doesn't matter whether it's rational, irrational, true, not true, but just that feeling that tomorrow is going to be better than today is what drives these people, because they think that they can get there. And that's what makes them not give up. The other characteristic I've seen is that they tend to be somewhat naive. You know, people who are extremely thoughtful, who can think through every issue in this world, everything that can go wrong with the world, are not people who tend to be entrepreneurs. I mean, they're good thinkers, but it's very hard to think of any idea or any effort that you can actually think through all the issues so that when you start the journey, you'll not have any problems. It's almost impossible. You know, as soon as you start the journey, there'll be lots of issues that you haven't thought about, and you have to be able to face them. So you need that naivete to somehow believe in the vision and the value of getting to that place that you're thinking you want to get to, and the little things that come along the way don't bother you. And so I think those two qualities are what I've seen, what makes entrepreneurs good entrepreneurs, because it makes them survive a lot longer, it makes them keep driving a lot longer, they can bulldoze through a lot of issues, a lot of problems, and so on. So,
can you go in little detail? What were you trying to build? What are the experiences? What happened? Get into a little bit, because I don't think many of the people know. Can you get into a little bit detail? What happened? What went wrong? What did you think? How did you overcome the challenges?
Okay.
Finally succeed.
So this is 80s, so long time ago, right? And so if I were to go back and think about it, you know, I used to work for Motorola. So those days, you could only send 300 bits per second on a phone line, right? So the big thing about this company that I worked for, we had figured out a way to do 9600 bits per second on a phone line. So that used to be like magical, right? But later on, when I left the company and started the next company, the first company was called Coral Networks. That's the company where, you know, I had to go without salary for a year. Jayshree was the breadwinner, and then we had 2 little kids, and so it was a very complex life. You know, we had to leave kids, the 3 and 5 year old, at 6 o'clock morning with some babysitter. They would take them somewhere else, and then I would pick them up at 6, and she would come home at 7. And something, you know, it was like just a difficult life for a year. But dream come true. I and my partner was a little bit more senior guy. He was an American. And those days, Indians were sort of considered good graduate students. They weren't really recognized as entrepreneurs. So I and Frank Bruns, my partner, at the end of the year, dream come true, we actually raised $3 million. Those days, $3 million was a lot of money. And we raised it from very prestigious venture capitalists, the TSOCH, Seven Rose, and so on. So everything sounded great. So Jayshree next day went and quit her job, and we started building the company. And what happened was that this product, what it was supposed to do was, you know, codec, the Motorola was all enterprise quality products for corporations. Everything was bulletproof and redundancy, everything else. But there was this little company called Cisco Systems coming along at that time, which was building routers. And they were building all these routers with just like taking PCs and plugging some cards in and everything else. Very powerful technology. And slowly, but that technology was not being adopted. But slowly, the corporations weren't adopting that technology, but it was sneaking up from the bottom. You know, a lot of the General Motors plants started running on local area networks and so on. But they had no redundancy, they had no enterprise quality standards. So when we went and spoke to these customers, they said, hey, you know, if you can build that, sure, I'll buy one. And so we had found a way to do some custom silicon which would make 10 times more performance than Cisco. And so then we got the money, we started designing the chip, and it turned out that 10 times was very hard. 5 times was a piece of cake. 7, 8 was doable. So my simple approach was, hey Frank, let's get the 5 times going, because 5 times something better than what the competition has is more than enough to get going. But Frank he wouldn't give in. So this conversation went on 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks. At the end of the 6 weeks, he just wasn't willing to give up. He said, no, we can make it work. We can get the 10x. So I knew that we had this big difference of opinion in terms of how we approach this problem. And so I remember I was driving to the work at 7:30 in the morning. I stopped at the gas station, called up Jayshree and said, I think I'm going to resign today. So, because, this is the hard turn that I'm talking about. Because like he was a lot senior than I was. So the board was not going to listen to me. And so I went to the company and I said, hey, Frank, I don't think we agree. We had equal shares, but he was more senior. So I said, I don't want to be the person who constantly is here, keeps saying, I told you so, because whatever little chance he has of being successful, even that will be diminished if there's somebody who doesn't believe in where you're going. And so I just decided to resign. And in some ways, that was the best decision I made, because otherwise I could have hung in there for another year, 2 years, 3 years, and not agree with the thing. And unfortunately, I was correct, and the company took a long time, and finally it got sold for 15 million or some small amount of money. But after I left that, it was difficult, because neither of us had jobs. We were in a foreign country. Mortgage, no money for mortgage to pay the home, all that kind of stuff. But it all sounds dramatic when I tell you, but actually when you go through it, it's not that bad. And what happens is, anytime you try to do something big, doesn't matter whether you call it an entrepreneur or otherwise. I'm sure Ashok building this research park was a lot of nightmares, right? I mean, what if this goes wrong? What if that goes wrong? A lot of things can go wrong. So you get shaken up. But when you get that situation, your comfort zone broadens. Most of us in India, we grow up in a middle class family. We are brought up by parents who really are very protective. So you live in a certain way. And when things go beyond that, you start feeling very uncomfortable. And in the entrepreneurial journey, what happens is your comfort zone broadens. When your comfort zone keeps broadening, that's when you become more and more comfortable to take on bigger and bigger things. Because the bigger things that you take, the more uncomfortable it is. Because you have less and less things under your control, right? And so, in fact, you'll never see anybody who's done anything big without having failed. There's always failures along the way. So not that you go looking for failures, but when they happen, you have to have the ability to face them and move on. And fortunately, within the next 6 months, I regrouped, and this time I was the main guy. And by that time, the venture guys had sort of seen me and so on. This is what I was talking about, how the second one, they were willing to seed fund me. So they gave me $150,000 to pull the plan together, the team together, and everything else. And the idea for the next company, Cascade Communications, was, at that time, what was happening was all the computers were all getting interconnected within a company for productivity, because they were all mainframes. But slowly, companies like Ford and GM, they were all trying to connect their vendors to those networks so that they can automatically do things and everything else. And then when I looked at the history of phones, in 20s and 30s, the phones were very similar. Phones were always used only by companies to talk within a company. And by 1979, 1980, 88, 89, when I started the company, there was no phone in the world which couldn't connect to every other phone in the world, right? So my idea was that every computer has to get connected to every other computer in the world. If that's true, 2 things have to happen. Number one, those networks have to be public networks. And secondly, those public networks have to be built on ability to switch data, not just phone calls. And so that was the idea behind the Cascade Communications. And what happened was, a couple of years later, suddenly internet took off. And when internet took off, Cascade just took off. And so we went public within like 3.5, 4 years, 94. And so by the time we then merged with Lucent and so on in 97, we were carrying 80 to 85% of the backbone traffic for the internet, because we were the ones building all the public networks to carry that internet traffic. So I think the lesson there is that you have to just stick with entrepreneurship as a career, and you'll always have opportunities. And second time, it's so much more easier. And of course, the third company was even faster, Sycamore Networks. I started that in 98, I think 99. It went public within 18 months. In the very first quarter, our revenues were $10 million in the fifth quarter, right? And then our quarterly revenue growth was 10 million, 20 million, 30 million, 60, 90, 120, 150 million. These are quarterly revenue growths, right? And so, but it wasn't that hard to deal with it because I'd sort of gone through Cascade and everything else. So I think it just becomes easier and easier as you start building these things. And so, but you just have to make sure that you stick with this as a career, not as a one-time thing where things may work out, may not work out. Sometimes people get lucky and they start a company and within 18 months somebody buys them or they go public or something, depending on the market. But that's 1 in a million. Most of the time, it's always like a little bit harder journey than what you think it is. So.
I have a question regarding the timing. As in, like, when do you know that a particular startup is no longer tenable? And when do you, because the first startup which you actually were a part of, you left because you thought a particular solution was not feasible in the short term or in the medium term. So when do you decide if a particular idea is feasible or not in the near term, and when do you drop it or move to the next idea?
Yeah, it's always worth doing it if customers are willing to pay for it. If there are customers who say they want the solution and they want it badly. And almost everybody will say they will want a solution if you give it very cheap, if it does everything and it costs nothing, right? But that doesn't build a company. So the solution has to be something that isn't available. It improves something for him. It makes him run his business better, twofold, threefold, whatever. And as long as that hypothesis is true, it's worth doing it. Now, the second question is, can you do it or not, right? And most of the time, technically, you should be able to do it, particularly in these days, because the technology is so powerful that you'll be able to do it. But sometimes you can run into trouble where it's not possible to do it, right? In fact, I started a battery company, and the battery, it was called A123 because of the A12 van der Waals forces. It so happens that if you have these molecules, there's van der Waals forces between the molecules and you get a separation. So we had this technology where you could take cathode and anode and you just mix it up and you make it like a little paste. And it had the chemistry so that the van der Waals forces separated the anodes and the cathodes molecules. So you could paint it on top of a laptop, you could do anything you want to do with it, and then you put electrolyte in between, and it becomes a very powerful battery, very dense, because the separation between the anode and the cathode is very, very small. So the professor at MIT was able to show that it actually works in a very, very small cell, and we thought we could scale it. So we started the company, we started doing it, but it turned out that as soon as you start building slightly bigger things, the amount of purity that you needed was just not working out. It was always find a short somewhere because it's millions and millions of molecules that you had to control. So at that time, even though it's worth doing it, because everybody was saying, hey, I want lots of those, But we couldn't get it done. So we had to pivot, and then we did slightly different technology. So first question is it worth doing it? It's always worth doing it if customers want it. That's why you should never start a company without talking to the customers. And you should continue to talk to them to make sure that things have not changed, either the way they do business or some technology or some other competition or whatever. So you always have to, that first question is the most important question. Is it worth doing it? Or who cares? And if that question is answered, then of course, as you start doing it, if you get to a point where you think it's not possible right now, maybe it's possible 10 years from now, but you're not going to live that long in a startup, so you'll have to pivot.
Hello sir, so I'm Anusha. I'm starting my PhD in IIT Madras. So you mentioned earlier that you had to regroup every time you left the company. So I just want to know how hard it was to regroup, because you don't get people who agree with you all the time. So I just want to know how that works.
Yeah, so I think when you start, you always start with a clean slate of paper, and nothing exists, and you have to start from there, right? And then it's a question of, and that's where entrepreneurs are good at. They're very good in creating that excitement and the vision and everything else. And the more people who buy into it, the easier it becomes. Then you need a good team, you need good investors, and slowly you have to create a momentum that sort of feels like, hey, the train is leaving. You're going to be successful. It's going to work, right? And the train is leaving, and it's an opportunity for you either to get on or not get on. And what happens is it's sort of, what I found is that it's a snowball effect. You get a couple of very good people, who are making a lot of money and who give everything up just to come and join you because they think that it's going to be even more successful than they could otherwise. And then that adds momentum. And then suddenly every investor says, hey, I want to be part of the deal. And then you get a couple of those guys. So I think you have to create that momentum of the fact that it's going to be successful. Then a lot of people get very excited about it and they join you. But the vision has to be something that is everybody, you have to sell them the fact that it's worth doing it.
So for someone who's looking to pursue entrepreneurship as a career, what path would you recommend? To me right now, there are two ways. The first is you focus on your field and convert an idea or project, expand it to solve a problem, and then eventually get a company there. Or the other way is you focus on learning entrepreneurial skills like finance, logistics, and sort of make the most of an opportunity that comes your way. So which of the two would you recommend this to?
Some people become entrepreneurs at very young age, when they graduate. Or most famous entrepreneurs are the dropouts, right? Whether it's Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg or whatever. And so it's really a question of, when do you have this burning desire that you think you're ready to do it? And it almost gets to be so feverish that you can't help yourself. You will do it. But you can prepare for it, right? And so you don't know when that's going to strike, whether it's going to strike like as soon as you graduate, or maybe 5 years from now, or 10 years from now. But you have to have that entrepreneurial skill, to have that initiative, to go out of your way to learn these skills. Like you're saying, finance, marketing, because ultimately, whenever you want to run a business is like a chain. It has, engineering, it has marketing, it has sales, it has finance, it has all kinds of stuff. And if you want to build this business, a bigger and bigger business, it's like pulling the chain. And what breaks the chain is the weakest link, not the strongest link. And so you have to have some appreciation. You don't have to be an expert in those fields, but you have to have some appreciation for what they are. And they're not really that complex. I mean, you don't have to be a super expert. You don't have to be a chartered accountant to understand how money works. And so I think just being a little bit more open-minded, open to learning different skill sets. In fact, I'm a PhD guy, so I can tell you this. Usually when you do PhD, you don't get a PhD unless you go deeper and deeper into something, right? And ultimately you have to get something that nobody else has seen before, right? I mean, that's what gets you a PhD. So you get a PhD when you know everything about nothing. But entrepreneurship is a little bit of knowing everything about nothing. Everything about, little bit about everything, right? Nothing about everything. One is everything about nothing. Another one is nothing about everything, right? It's like at least you need to have some appreciation for all the different facets of what it takes to be an entrepreneur, so that you're not phased. You don't want to be the person. So what happens is if you can combine your strength, and most of you, are blessed with excellent education, and you have that intellectual depth. And so if you can somehow combine the intellectual depth with common sense, it's a very powerful tool. That's what I found. Most of the people who are intellectually very capable, usually slowly they tend to lose their common sense, because they get very argumentative, because they constantly are in an intellectual wrestling match with their peers, right? Because that's what builds their muscles, intellectual muscles. And constantly, most of the arguments, most of the debates are all about some little corner thing that they're talking about, which is okay, because that's how you build your intellectual capabilities and everything else. But to that, if you can add also the common sense that you're talking about learning about other things, you become very powerful. Because if there's an issue, you have the ability to dig deep, but you also have the ability not to go too deep and get stuck in one issue and ignore all the other issues. So I think it's just a question of just being open-minded and developing both your intellectual skills, but also your broad knowledge. And exactly when you start, I think it doesn't matter. You'll know when to start. So.
What do you do when cash runs out?
Well, you keep going to the extent that you can, but sometimes you do have to take that hard pivot at that point. What can you do, right? So but usually what happens is I've not really gone through that experience myself, where the cash has gotten to the point where you don't have to meet a payroll. But you probably know FedEx, which is a very, very large company. Fred Smith, the guy who's founded the company, when he started the company, he actually came to the point where he had enough payroll for only 2 weeks. And he didn't know how to do the next payroll. And you only had a little bit of money. So the story goes that he actually took that money and went to Las Vegas. And he gambled all that money on one number. And for his good luck, he actually won. and he made that much money, and then he was able to meet the payroll, and the rest is history, right? So I think somehow you have to have that optimistic feeling that things will work out, and sometimes they don't, and that's okay too. And that's when you have to do the pivot. So, yeah.
Hi sir, my name is Pranjal and I am first year student. So my question is, since you have been in the field of entrepreneurship for these many years, what is the difference you have noticed between entrepreneurs of your time, like in 1980s and 1990s, and the entrepreneurs of today? Like, how far has entrepreneurship evolved since you started as an entrepreneur?
So, I think the entrepreneurship, the world is now changing faster and faster and faster because you have a lot more entrepreneurs. If you look at a typical company that was started like IBM or whatever, a long time ago, the companies changed, the product came to the market and it lasted for a long time, right? 10 years. And then maybe it changed a little bit. You know, this is long before you bought, but you're born. But when we were little, if you wanted to buy a car, there was Ambassador, there was Fiat. And even that, you had to wait for 10 years before you could get a car, right? And so there were not too many options. The market didn't change very fast. And so the entrepreneurs, it's not like entrepreneurs had to react that actively to the marketplace. But now, it's so competitive. If you bought a phone today, and if you want to buy the same phone 12 weeks from now, you're not going to be able to buy it, right? There'll be another version of the phone. And so, because of the entrepreneurship, the world changes faster and faster, and the competition becomes more intense. So the entrepreneur has to be able to respond to that intense competition and the intense pace at which the world is changing. And so that's the difference on the hard side. On the easy side, it's you have access to market, you have access to capital, you have fantastic incubators, you have knowledge, you have coaches, you have mentors. You know, that whole ecosystem has been developed, right? So any entrepreneur who actually wants to do entrepreneurship, wants to bring about a change, and has a semi-decent idea, will more than likely be successful, because there is so much ecosystem and hand-holding and support that they will be successful, right? Because all of that exists, whereas previously none of that thing existed, and so everything was like a risk. So that's the change. So in some ways it's easier, in some ways harder, and it'll always be like that. You know, I think things will become easier, but there'll be other things that will become harder. Because if you make it easier, then more and more people will do it, which means it becomes harder and harder to differentiate your product, to do something, because whatever you do, if it's a good thing, there'll be 10 other guys who will be trying to do the same thing again, right, somewhere else. And so you have to protect your market, you have to protect your brand, you have to protect your position in the marketplace, and so you have to keep on your toes all the time to keep up with it. So.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
I'm Bhagesh, I'm a final year student at IIT Madras, and I'm also currently heading the entrepreneurship cell of IIT Madras along with Nishant here. So my question essentially is about the co-founder dynamics. As you mentioned, your friend asked you to work on something on your own and maybe move on from the teaching career as well. Especially now we are in college, so it's a bit unclear for us as to what kind of people or friends we should consider to work with. And I've seen some examples as well, like the friends are not able to work it out, etc. So, I mean, do you think there's any kind of criteria to consider?
Yeah, so the co-founders, you know, I think it works best. Number one, you have to believe in the same vision. You have to be motivated by the fact that you're trying to do something and it's worth doing it, right? If the basic, so it comes back to, is it worth doing it? You know, if you don't both believe in it, then it's not going to work at all. And then you have to agree on, you know, way to do it and working together on that. But none of these things, you can write them in a contract. And so it's really building that relationship and the trust between the two of them. So the more open you are, the better it is. But also, ability to talk very freely and discuss openly, you know, because it's always a question of, okay, who's going to be the CEO? Who's going to be the head of marketing? Who's going to be the head of engineering? And different people come with different skill set, right? And you have to be very clear that each one of you understand what your skill set is and what you're going to bring to the game. And own up that particular thing. So the more open a relationship that you have, the better it is. But unfortunately, there are no guarantees, right? So.
Can you tell us something about how you decided to build Tejas in India, and tell us a little bit of Tejas' story?
So I did, you know, companies in US. I'd never done a company in India. But I sort of followed the service businesses because it just so happens that Murthy's wife and my wife are sisters, right? So ever since Murthy, we got married in 1980, and that's when Narayana Murthy started the company. So we met always 3-4 times a year and exchange notes and everything else. So every time I would come back, they would always say, hey, how do you build a product company? And so I'd seen the way this service evolved over the course of next 20 years, right? But there were no product companies in India. And India was importing, and it still imports, all the electronics, all kinds of stuff, which all of you are totally capable of doing, right? But it doesn't exist, because what happens is in the service companies, the model was very powerful. It was dollar revenue, because you always sold to foreign customers, and you paid your people's salaries in rupees. So dollar income, rupee expense works beautifully. And it's a cost plus model, so you'll never lose money, right? In the product business, unfortunately, it's a gamble. You think that you're going to build this product that people will buy, and so you have to invest up front. And Ashok was board of director of this company from day one. And so I said, and the genesis as to how Tejas got started is because there's a guy by name Kumar Sivarajan. Kumar is a gold medalist from IIT Madras in 1980s. And then he went to US, went to PhD from Caltech, which is a good place. And then he worked for IBM. And then he came back and he was a professor at IISc. And so this is right after I built this company, Sycamore. And Sycamore was an optical networking company. And so one year, 2000 sometime, I met him at a conference. So he came to me and said, hey, you are a professor, you're an entrepreneur. I'm a professor, I want to be an entrepreneur. And I found that this guy, Kumar Sivarajan, had written a book on optical networking, which was the most authoritative book on optical networking that all the Sycamore engineers used in Boston, right? So I said, hey, this is such fantastic talent in India that we should be able to build a company. So Ashok joined us as a board member, and then I hired a CEO, we hired a VP of engineering, we got them going, but they didn't have any knowledge of how to build a product. So we actually made them a sort of work on contract with Sycamore. So they were doing some contract work for us in products so that they get an exposure to products. They were installing all the networks in foreign countries and everything else. And so at the end of a year and a half, they had a choice. So I said, okay, you guys have a choice. Either you can sell yourself to Sycamore and become a part of Sycamore, because Sycamore can then use this as their outsourcing arm to India, or you can build your own company in India. And these guys picked the hard road. They said, we want to build a company in India because India needs product companies. And so they started the, building, working on the products, design and everything else. And we had about 300 engineers, out of which about 250 of them actually came from Bell Labs and US and so on. So we had a very, very talented group of engineers. And so within about a year or so, they came up with some fantastic products which were pretty, leading edge, better than what anybody else had. But the Indian customers would not believe that Indians can build products. So the irony is, Reliance, Bharti, all these guys, when they were building their networks, they would not buy from Tejas. They would buy the technology from Nortel. Nortel would OEM the product from Tejas. So we had to build the products in India, ship it to them, and they would ship it back to India and build these networks. So that's how all the networks got built. And then this went on for about 10 years. And then after that, slowly Indians started believing that, yeah, Tejas can build these products, So they started saying, hey, okay, we'll buy it from you guys. But then they would say, but this is made in India. We shouldn't be paying you the same price. So we went through that phase. But finally, after 22 years, the company really has proven itself. And now, and also with Modi's initiative for Atmanirbhar and 5G network and everything else, they're one of the leading companies right now to implement the 5G network, which is like thousands of crores worth of business for the company. And also, the opportunity is so big that Tata's decided to jump in and partner with the company. So the company, it took a long time. It took a long time to build it, but I'm hoping that this company will showcase to other entrepreneurs, other investors, that in fact, India is ready for product companies now. That you can actually, because if you can build products and dominate the market in India, it's not that hard to take those products to other countries. Like Tejas now sells it in 65 different countries. And so the opportunity is huge. So I hope a lot of you think about product business. I'm sure all of you are product companies now, because in India it's becoming pretty standard. I think software has become pretty much there. A lot of the big companies, the unicorns are all software product companies. But I'm hoping similarly there will also be hardware companies, whether it's in medical technology or energy and so on. So, yeah.
So from your speech, I'm able to understand that you have created multiple companies. So my question is there anything like work-life balance, like for an entrepreneur, or it's different phases of the company that gives you time for all the other leisures? Because you're just expanding your comfort zone. So we all want comfort. That's the comfort and peace. That's true. Whether it's to be an entrepreneur or a person who is doing a normal job, just that an entrepreneur is able to expand his comfort zone. So can you talk about like work-life balance or integrating it overall? Can you talk about it?
I think what I found is that there's absolutely no doubt in my own priority that family comes number one. The way I remember that is to remember this particular analogy. In life, you're always juggling many balls, right? And there's family, there's philosophy, your own spirituality, friends, work, all these different balls. And you're juggling them all. And all of them are crystal balls. And so you have to be very careful when you juggle them, because if you drop them, they shatter, right? The only ball that's different is the work. Work is the only rubber ball. If it falls down, it's perfectly fine, because it'll bounce back and you'll get an opportunity to catch it and juggle again, right? But the other balls, you cannot afford to drop them. But taking care of them does not mean, if you want to take care of your family, actually what happens is, I have a lot of colleagues in the US who have been successful, but they absolutely have destroyed all the crystal balls. They have no life, they have no family, they have divorced like 10 times, and so you don't want to live a life like that. That's not what entrepreneurship is in my mind. You have to value all the things. And in some ways, the family also respects your commitment to them. And so, like if ever I had to do anything with our kids or anything like that, I was always there. But what happens usually, I don't get called on it. So I can still do all the work, but if ever I'm required, I'm there, right? It doesn't mean that you are any less intense in what you do, but you always make sure that you're there for the family. And what happens is, when you're having fun working on things and producing things and everything else, you're happy, you're proud. And so you actually deal with your family also in a very nice way. What I found is that, let's say if somebody is unemployed or somebody is in a job which they hate, so they go to work and 15 minutes the job is done, they don't know what to do, they just hang around there in front of the computer, play some games and come home. They have a lot of time and they're spending a lot of time with their family, but I don't know if that's a quality time. It'll not be a happy time. So I think being intense in work and also having the family values, they can go hand in hand. They don't have to be opposite of each other. So
when you first went to Sycamore, which is apparently your biggest success, At that time, there was so much competition. You mentioned the differentiation. There was so much competition between the networks and one network optical networking company after the other. Did you just get very lucky with timing, or was it the fact that you five guys scrambled so well to differentiate against their suffering and your customers? Could you comment on that?
Yeah, so I think the success of Sycamore was mostly the first mover advantage. You know, because when I was with Cascade and Cisco, all these companies, we were spending close to $1 billion a year on trying to figure out how to make best use of the bandwidth. And so, because a typical bandwidth, even from Boston to California, or Boston to London, would cost you $1 million a month, right? Just a small pipe. And because everything was so expensive, there was a constant struggle of putting more important things ahead of the less important things. That was called quality of service. And all the research was going after that part of it, you know, making sure video goes first, and then voice, and then the packets, all that kind of stuff. But I used to mentor a lot of entrepreneurs. I mean, I must have started maybe 100 companies, because every day, that's all I did. Because after the Cascade, my full-time job, morning till evening, was just talking to people like people in the room here and just helping them start companies. But one of those guys who came there to talk to me were these couple of engineers from MIT. And when they explained to me what they were thinking about, where, you know, you have a laser, you have a fiber, which is as thin as a hair, and you blink the laser on it on one side, it's 10 billion times a second, right? Just one laser. And you can put about 200 of those lasers at different colors, right? So it's just such a powerful technology. I said, why are we fighting over this little quality of service? But the problem was, the telephone companies would take about 6 months to provision a new line. Even if you had the bandwidth, they would take a lot of time. So the whole concept behind Sycamore was to combine that need, and also we knew how to switch packets almost real time, like OSPF, you know, there were a lot of protocols and everything else. So we combined that switching technology with this optical technology to build intelligent optical networking. So, and also, so you would build a mesh network with optical network, so that the provisioning time, actually, we wanted to bring it down from 6 months to 6 days to 6 hours to real time. And we actually did it. And when people saw that it was possible to do that, then suddenly the market took off. And also, what happened was, it just so happened that at that time, the AT&T monopoly broke up. And then suddenly all the regional Bell operating companies came, and then there was permission for private companies to start building networks. And they all started getting huge valuations. So we just couldn't keep up with the demand, and that's part of the reason why it was like a rocket ship. And then, but once we were successful, we had more market cap than Lucent and Ericsson and Siemens, all these guys who had been in business for hundreds of years. So each one of them started throwing billions and billions of dollars in optical networking. Every venture guy had a Sycamore knockoff. And so what happened was that the market overshot. You know, typically, technology was always, the demand was like that, technology could never keep up with it. And so you always got a premium when you gave a little bit more. But now, technology went there, and the demand was here. And so everything collapsed.
I'm just finally a student at IIT Madras. So my question is, like, in your point of view, like, what should be the stage at which one should start looking for funding from external sources instead of like bootstrapping phase, like sort of stopping the bootstrapping?
Yeah, there are some businesses which you can bootstrap all the way. And if you can, you should, because then you have complete control over the company, everything else, right? Because you can bootstrap your way. But there are times when you have to raise money, and there are two times when you have to do that. Either you need to develop a product which is going to cost, let's say, 25 crores, 100 crores, whatever. So there's no way you can bootstrap, right? You need that money to build a product. Or the market is so hot that it's going to just take off like crazy. If the market is going to take off very fast, then you have to raise a lot of money, because only the people who have more than 30% market share make a lot of money. Then the next guy will make some money, third guy will make maybe something, fourth guy may break even, and then after that everybody loses, right? So if it's a very fast moving market, fast developing market, you want to make sure that you have enough resources to address that. So raising money is a question of, does the type of business that you're getting in, does it call for that money? And if it requires money, you should not start before you actually get the money. Let's say if you a product, it requires 5 crores to develop a product. I mean, you would not have the 5 crores, and so you can bootstrap. And so let's say you have 5 lakhs. What you don't want to do, which most of the engineers feel very comfortable, start developing the product with that 5 lakhs. And they'll say, oh, I'll develop this much for 5 lakhs, then somebody will give me 5 crores. They won't. So you want to raise at 5 crores, because they're not giving you money and questioning whether you can technically build it or not. They're more worried about what you're building. Is it worth building it, right? So you want to raise that money before you spend your 5 lakhs. So it's really a question of what kind of business you want to get into.